was going to paint solar systems on the backs of her hands, so she has to learn the entire universe before she can say, I know that like the back of my hand. I want her to look at the world through the underside of a glass-bottom boat, to look through a microscope at the galaxies that exist on the pinpoint of the human mind, because that's the way my mom taught me, that there will be days like this. There'll be days like this, Mama said, when you reach out to grab and wind up only with blisters and bruises. When you step out of the phone booth and try to fly, but the very people you want to save are the ones standing on your cape. When your boots will fill with rain, and you will be up to your knees in disappointment. But those are the days you have all the more reason to say thank you. Because there is nothing more beautiful than the way the ocean refuses to stop kissing the shoreline, no matter how many times it is sent away. You will put the wind in win some and lose some. You will put the star in starting over and over. And no matter how many landmines erupt in a minute, be sure your mind lands on the beauty of this place called life. And remember, I'll tell her, your mom is a worrier, but your papa is a warrior, and you are a girl with small hands and big eyes who never stops asking for more. Your voice is small, but don't ever stop singing. So when they finally hand you heartache, when they slip war and hatred under your door and offer you handouts on street corners of cynicism and defeat, you tell them that they really ought to meet your mother. When we think of poetry, we usually think of words on a page. But the influence of spoken word poetry is everywhere, from Shakespeare to rap music. Performance poet Sarah Kay founded the organization Project Voice to encourage self-expression and education through spoken word. In her TED Talk, Kay performs her pieces and shares her insights, revealing that poetry is a method not only to express, but also to experience. If I Should Have a Daughter by Sarah Kay. Spoken word is the art of performance poetry. I tell people it involves creating poetry that doesn't just want to sit on paper, that something about it demands to be heard out loud or witnessed in person. When I was a freshman in high school, I was fascinated by the idea of spoken word. I felt that my two secret loves, poetry and theater, had come together, had a baby I needed to get to know, so I decided to give it a try. My first poem, packed with all the wisdom of a 14-year-old, was about the injustice of being seen as unfeminine. The poem was mainly indignant, mostly exaggerated, but the only spoken word I had seen up until that point was indignant, so I thought that was what was expected of me. The first time that I performed, that audience of teenagers hooted and hollered their sympathy, and when I came off that stage, I was shaking. I felt this tap on my shoulder. Turned around and saw this giant girl in a hoodie. She looked like she was 8 feet tall and could beat me up with one hand, but instead, she smiled and said, "Hey, I really felt that. Thanks." And lightning struck. I was hooked. So I can divide my spoken word journey into 3 steps. Step 1 was the moment I said, I can do this. And that was thanks to a girl in a hoodie. Step 2 was the moment I said, I will continue. And step 3 began when I realized that I did not have to write poetry that was indignant, and that's not what I was. There were things that were specific to me, and the more that I focused on those things, the weirder my poetry got, but the more that it felt like mine. It's not just the adage you write what you know. It's about gathering all the information and experience you've collected up to now to help you dive into the things that you don't know. I write poetry to help me figure stuff out, but I arrive at each new poem with a backpack full of everywhere else that I've been. So poetry cracks open locks, but it turns out that sometimes writing poetry can be really scary. Turns out sometimes you have to trick teenagers into writing poetry. So I come up with lists. Everyone can write lists. And the first list that I assign is 10 things I know to be true. And here's what happens if we all started sharing our lists out loud. At a certain point, you would realize that someone in this room has the exact same thing on their list as you do. Second, someone else has something the complete opposite. And third, someone has something you thought you knew everything about, but they're introducing a new angle of looking at it. And this, I tell people, this is where great ideas come from, this intersection of what you're passionate about and what others might be invested in. So this activity usually works great with most people, but one of my students, a freshman named Charlotte, was not impressed. Charlotte was great at writing lists, but she refused to write poetry. Miss, she'd say, I'm just not interesting. I don't have anything interesting to say. So I signed her list after list. And one day I assigned her the list 10 things I should have learned by now. Number 3 on Charlotte's list was, I should have learned not to crush on guys 3 times my age. I asked her what that meant, and she said, Miss, it's kind of a long story. Sounds pretty interesting to me, Charlotte, I said. And so Charlotte wrote her first poem, a love poem, unlike any I have ever heard before, and it began like this. Anderson Cooper is a gorgeous man. Did you see him on 60 Minutes racing Michael Phelps in a pool with nothing but swim trunks on, diving into the water determined to beat this swimming champion? After the race, he tossed his wet, cloud-white hair and said, You're a god. No, Anderson, you're the god. Now, I know the number 1 rule to being cool is to seem unfazed, to pretend that nothing scares you, excites you, or impresses you. Someone once told me it's like walking through life like this. You try to protect yourself from all the hurt and misery that might come your way. But I try to walk through life like this. And yeah, that means catching all the hurt and misery, but it also means that when beautiful, amazing things just fall out of the sky, I'm ready to catch them. I definitely walked through life like that when I was a child, and I think that we all did. I'd like to help people rediscover that wonder, to want to learn, to want to share what they've learned, what they've figured out to be true, and what they're still figuring out. So I'd like to close with this poem. When they bombed Hiroshima, the explosion caused a mini supernova so that every living human, animal, or plant that came within direct contact with the rays of that sun was instantly turned to ash. My mom says when I was born, I looked around the hospital room with a stare that says, I've done this before. When my grandpa Genji died, I was only 5 years old, but I took my mom by the hand and said, don't worry, you'll come back as a baby. And yet for someone who has apparently done this all already, I still don't have anything figured out. My knees still buckle every time I get on a stage. My self-confidence can be measured out in teaspoons mixed into my poetry, and it still tastes funny in my mouth. But in Hiroshima, some people were wiped clean away, leaving nothing but a wristwatch or a diary page as the only proof that they ever existed. So no matter that I have enough inhibitions to fill all my pockets, I keep trying, hoping that one day I will write a poem that I can be proud to let sit in a museum exhibit as the only proof that I ever existed. My parents named me Sarah, which is a biblical name. In the original story, God told Sarah she could do the impossible. And at first, Sarah, well, she laughed because she didn't know what to do with impossible. And me? Neither do I. But I see the impossible every day. Impossible is trying to connect to this world, trying to hold on to others while things are blowing up around you, knowing that while you're speaking, they aren't just waiting for their turn to talk. They hear you. They feel exactly what you feel at the moment you feel it, and that is what I strive for every time that I open my mouth, that impossible connection. After the A-bomb, specialists said it would take 75 years for that radiation-damaged soil to ever grow anything again, but that spring, new buds were popping up from the earth. I don't know if I can change the world, because I don't know that much about it. And I don't know that much about reincarnation either, but if you make me laugh hard enough, sometimes I forget what century I'm in. This isn't my first time here, and this isn't my last time here. But just in case, I am trying my hardest to get it right this time